Welcome back. Russia is changing its strategy in its invasion of Ukraine, redeploying troops to the east and trying to gain control of the Donbass region. Former CIA director and U.S. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta is no stranger to Vladimir Putin or his tactics of war. I spoke with Secretary Panetta earlier about this next phase and why he sees it as a critical moment in this conflict. Secretary Panetta, nice of you to make the time for us. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
There does seem to be a broad agreement that this war has entered a different phase because the Russian troops have pulled out of Kyiv and seem to be concentrating their efforts in the east of Ukraine. Do you think we are in a different phase? And if so, how would you characterize it?
Well, I don't think there's any question we've entered a different phase. I view it as kind of three phases we've been through with regards to this war. Phase one was the failed invasion by the Russians in trying to capture Kyiv quickly and trying to bring down the government. That obviously failed and it didn't work. The second phase was Russia going into almost siege warfare and total destruction, going after innocent men, women, and children to try to break the will of the Ukrainians. And frankly, that hasn't worked either. So we're now entering phase three, which is the retreat of the Russians from the capital and trying to regroup and retrofit and trying to pull their forces back together in order to go after the Donbass area and try to retain that. So we are now in probably a critical third phase where the issue is going to be whether the Ukrainians can continue to push the Russians out of Ukraine or whether the Russians can get some traction and try to retain that part of Ukraine.
And do you think that given the Western support in the terms of military aid and humanitarian aid, that Ukraine will be able to prevail, given that it has gone on, I think we would all agree, longer than anyone expected?
Well, I think we've all gained a great deal of confidence in the ability of Ukrainians to fight bravely and courageously and be able to really succeed in defending themselves from a force that without question outnumbered them. And so I think the key right now is for the United States and our allies to provide as many weapons as necessary, whether it's Stingers or Javelins, whether it's S-300s, S-400s, anti-aircraft, anti-tank, anti-personnel, whatever possible weapons can be provided to the Ukrainians. Now is the time to do it, because I think this is a moment where the Ukrainians, if they are able to succeed, I think can ultimately achieve the goal that they all seek, which is to have a Ukraine that is a sovereign democracy without any Russians in that country.
Have you been in any way surprised by NATO's response? And by that, I mean the way that allies have come together and even now seem to be attracting new members, Finland and Sweden now considering becoming members of the alliance.
Yeah, there's no question. In many ways, the very thing that Putin did not want to happen, which was to strengthen NATO, has happened. And he is frankly the reason why NATO has come together in a unified way. And I'm really pleased by that. I've been to Brussels. I've met with our NATO allies. Oftentimes, they're very different. They have their own countries, their own views, their own way to approach things. And so it isn't exactly easy to pull them all together in a unified approach. But the United States and President Biden, working with our allies, have really developed an example of a very unified approach. They are working together on implementing these very tough sanctions. That's the only way these sanctions could even begin to work, is through that kind of unity. They're all working together to provide weapons to the Ukrainians. Different countries are providing different forms of sophisticated weapons to the Ukrainians. That is really working well in terms of supporting their forces. And lastly, they've reinforced the positions in the NATO countries along the border and have made clear to the Russians that if the Russians try to go into any of those countries, Article 5 will take effect and NATO will stand against any kind of further Russian invasion. So it is a very good example of how allies have to unify in order to deal with autocrats like Putin.
On Tuesday, President Joe Biden used the word genocide. It's something that President Zelensky has been also using in terms of how the Russians are trying to destroy Ukrainian people. You mentioned killing civilians. Do you think that we are at a point where that language should be used, needs to be used?
Well, ultimately, it will depend on the investigation of what has taken place and whether or not it reaches the level of a true genocide. But you have to say, with the number of people that have been killed in Bucha, the fact that I think they're estimating now 10,000 people killed in the south by the Russians, it really is approaching what I would think is the definition of genocide, which is an effort by Russians to basically wipe out Ukrainians.
Can I end on this, Secretary Panetta? It's not a very fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How does this end, do you think? Because it does seem as though talks aren't leading it anywhere. How do you think this comes to an end?
Well, it's something we're all concerned about. But look, Putin is a bully. And the only thing he really understands is force. Having worked with him in the past, there just is no question that he will only respond to force. And so it is really important that the Ukrainians keep the pressure on. This is a critical moment. The Russians are in retreat. They've been badly impacted in terms of logistics and command, and in terms of the capabilities of their fighting force. They've taken an awful lot of deaths on the Russian side, almost 10,000 or more. So they've really been hit hard. This is the moment. This is the opportunity for the Ukrainians in many ways to finish the job. And if they do that, I think Putin will have no alternative but to try to negotiate some kind of quick resolution. That is probably the best way that this can ultimately resolve itself. And frankly, it will be a tribute not only to Ukraine, but to the United States and our allies for having pulled together to make clear to Russia that a line has been drawn and they will pay a price for that kind of aggression.
Secretary Panetta, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.